Cassidy, welcome back to the Weight Champions podcast, and congratulations on the new book, my man.
Thanks, John. Pleasure to be back, and a pleasure to officially meet Jerry. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're
Wonderful.
excited. We were chatting about the book here and going through it and our sort of comments and thoughts on everything you write about here. So I know we have a lot to unpack today, and maybe let's just start, because it was a couple years ago we had you on last. Just give people a little bit of your background. And I think we were introduced by Dr. Joe Baker, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
You did your PhD under him. And so, yeah, just tell people about kind of what you do, and especially your background. I mean, you were a pretty high level junior hockey player. And so you have this experience as an athlete.
Yeah.
And then what happened to be as an athlete that maybe follow this path professionally?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it started with my hockey career. I'm from Canada. I had that Canadian dream of playing in the NHL, and I kind of fell flat on my face a little bit at times, and learned the long hard way about, how to not obsess so much about the results and focus more on who do I want to be in my mental state and my process. And so there's a lot of like fluffy stuff out there and a lot of cliches. And I was like, okay, well, let me go do my PhD. And I, under Joe and Jessica Fraser Thomas, was my lead supervisor, and get into the research more and find these practical, personalized strategies to optimize the impact. And so that's kind of took me on this journey. And then eventually I finished school. It took a while. And then once I finished school, I was like, all right, let's go to the field and start working with hockey players and all athletes and high performers outside a sport as sport as well. So it's been quite the journey, and it's kind of taking my personal experience that drove me to really kind of find a better way to deal with the challenges and adversities and those goals, and then taking a bunch of other people's stuff, Jerry's stuff, all the great work that's out there, and like, hey, how can I create a system and strategies to work one-on-one with athletes to impact their mindset so they can enjoy the journey, perform better, all of these great benefits. And then now I've been able to, I was like, oh, let's put this into a book now. It's like, now is the time. So
Yeah.
this is my first book. Excited to get it out there and share what I've learned.
I think a PhD thesis counts as a first book, to be honest.
Yeah. That was a couple hundred, that one.
A couple hundred pages. I always throw that one in there. I'm like, no one read it, but yes, that is my thesis was a lot of work. Yeah, awesome. And so this book, Mindset First, break free of the weight of results, play with confidence, and perform when it matters most. And I mean, I love that last little piece, perform when it matters most. It's easy when there's no pressure, right? It's easy when it's easy in practice. It's easy when you're up 6-0, whatever. But when it's tied with a couple minutes left, when the game's on the line, when you're trying to come back, when it's a lose and you're out, that's when we need to perform. And oftentimes we don't really train for that, do we?
No, yeah. And it's especially as people rise the ranks, the context, the weight of it, the pressure gets heavier and heavier. And do they always have the maturity level to deal with that, or the coping planning or mental skills to deal with it? And some people do learn it a bit quicker than others, but a lot of times they're getting like, well, just be positive. Like, well, don't worry about it. It's like, that might be the outcome, but is that the how-to? And how do we personalize it? Because for two people, both facing a pressure situation, the solution might be a little bit different, right? It probably is, because it's got to be personalized to them. How do they cope with that pressure? And how do they process that and channel that energy and dial into their process and their mindset and who they want to be in those key moments? So yeah, it's performing when it matters most, and that pressure part is huge, and especially in today's, which I'm sure we can go on a whole tangent on today's cultural setup and youth sports and how much pressure and the challenges of that, but whether that should all be there. But nonetheless, there's going to be pressure because the athletes care, and there's nothing wrong with caring. But how do you take that pressure, take that weight, and channel it and use it in a more effective way and keep the right mindset?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, when it was funny, I was on a bike ride yesterday with this group that I ride with, and one of the guys is a big ice hockey fan, and he was just mentioning a player who, had just came to a club this year and, multi-million-dollar contract and was struggling, and, they had benched him. He's like, well, what do you think of that? And I'm like, well, I don't follow it closely enough to know. I'm like, he's not performing well, right? So he's sitting on the bench, but like, what's behind that? And I mean, I don't, in the hockey world at the highest level, do most teams now have a sports psychologist? They have someone working with them, or is it sort of still one of those, what's wrong with you if you need that type of person?
Yeah, I think it's changing. I can't comment to every team, but I know a lot of teams are starting to have more, especially in the more of the AHL levels.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the NHL level, my understanding too, and some of the work I've done with the pros is like they don't always want to go to the team guy there, which is again part of a barrier around trust and it's perceived as weakness. They also don't want to go and tell the person on the team, here's all the things and the doubts that I have or the challenges, and then that get back to the coach and then they're looked at. So there's still a bit of an undertone of it, but I think it's changing. It's being definitely embraced more. Hockey's generally been a pretty slow uptake sport, and all the cultural problems we've seen in
Mm-hmm.
Canada hockey, particularly of late. But that's not just a hockey thing. But yeah, so it's I don't have all the numbers, but I know there's definitely a lot more, and there's different roles. Some play more like psychologist, right, dealing more
Mm-hmm.
mental health than performance coaching,
Mm-hmm.
and but yeah, the trend's going the right direction, that's for sure.
Yeah, Jerry, let me ask you this, because I think Cassidy brought up an interesting point, and I'd like to sort of hear both of your perspectives on this, right? And Jerry, when you work with teams, and when I've worked with teams, sort of like I come in as an extension of the coaching staff, right? And yet these personal conversations, right, that will I open up and trust if this might get back to the coaches? That's a really difficult line. Like, I don't have a PhD. I'm not a psychologist. So I always up front of like, listen, I'm an extension of the coaching staff. The things we talk about will get back. If you need to talk about stuff that doesn't get back, I'm not the right person. And so that's interesting. But Jerry, what are your thoughts on that? How do you navigate that balance?
It's an interesting question, John. I want to go back to what Cassidy just said, and I think a key element here is what do you call yourself? Am I a shrink or a stretch? Right? And I always like the latter. I always want to be stretching people's possibilities and opening up to other things. And that gets back to what you were saying. You used the word performance coach.
Mm.
I kind of like that. In fact, a lot of the people that get in touch with me who are working with NBA teams and so forth, and they have questions and they'll call me, and I do some research on that, and they're all calling themselves performance coaches.
Mm-hmm.
I stay away from the word psychology because, quite honestly, this world is still, unfortunately, not totally on board. There's not a complete buy-in. Like, people don't look at me or you and say, God, this is going to really enhance performance. It's usually like, oh, a psychologist, what's bothering you and what's getting in your way, and how you need to have this person pry into your brain, which I never do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know anything about the brain at all, But one of
Yeah.
the things that really helps me and see where this goes is I always have the conversation with the coach. If you're going to bring me in, I've got to be part of the team. I'm going to wear the uniform. I'm going to wear the clothing. I'll put the hat on. I'm not going to be this guy sitting out there with a shirt and tie on and what have you. So I'm already integrated. They like that. The athletes like it. And the coach talks to the team ahead of time. And the coach sits down and says, all right, so I have some experience. So they'll say, Jerry has worked with so many teams. These are the teams that he works with. He's had a lot of success. Or maybe it was in the beginning and I didn't have a lot of success. And maybe the coach just says, we're bringing this guy, Jerry, in. Dr. Lynch is an athlete himself, and he has got experience with athletes. And if you ever want to talk to him individually, fine. Otherwise, he's going to work with the team. And by the way, if you work with him individually, we have an agreement. I'll never ask you what you guys are talking about, and he'll honor the confidentiality piece. So that's got to be right up front, right in the beginning, so there's no understanding. Now, the first person you see, they'll know from then on that indeed you do honor that. But I see you're nodding your head, so why don't you
Yeah.
take that, Cassidy? And
Yeah, I think it's huge. That confidentiality piece is like, because, and I say this, even when somebody comes in, not from a team, it's like, this is confidential. Because if I'm like, oh yeah, so-and-so told me their thing, like no
Mm-hmm.
one would ever
yeah,
trust me. Like it's,
Mm-hmm.
and if people can't trust us, then how am I going to give them any kind of guidance or coaching and mentorship and that stuff? So I think that's, it's a huge piece. And also they're like, oh, well, how do I know and trust that they're going to be confidentiality? And they have to like, it's building that trust through time. And what I've done a little bit, I'm sure you've done a lot more, is it's like those first few athletes that come in and now they're like, oh, not only is this good, like it helped me and it performed better. Now other people are more open to coming in and doing those one-on-one sessions. So it's definitely, I think there's a process to it. It's not like an easy, like, oh, everyone's just going to line up at the front door the way maybe we would like it to be, and hope like, hey, yeah, everyone wants, hey, how can I get some coaching, some performance and grow, not shrink, right?
mm-hmm.
And but I think it's, the tide is turning and people are more open to it, but it's definitely a process when you're part of that coaching staff. There's some hesitation there, I think initially. That's some of my experience.
Let
One of the
me.
things,
Sorry, go ahead,
one,
Jerry.
let me just finish, John.
Yeah.
One of the
Yeah.
things that I do that's really been helpful is I'll be sitting in a session with an individual one-on-one, and they'll say something that I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, this is the key. This is so important.
Mm,
The coach really needs to know this. And
mhm,
I'll look at the athlete and I'll say, you know what? This is between you and I. It's not going to go anywhere. But if I could have a conversation with the coach about this, it's going to help your game and it's
Mm.
going to help your position on the team. So that also drives up the trust factor. The fact that I'm going to stop in my boots and just say, look, this is really important. I would like to talk to the coach, but I'm not unless you
mm.
give me permission. And I believe this is going to be a key element in your progress. I just wanted to throw that in there, John, because I think that's crucial.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'd friend, it's like, I want to go to bat for you. That makes sense. Like we want to, we're all on the same team here.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
so that's, I think that environment can work really well. And yeah, I think it's a good discussion.
Well, I was gonna. I'm glad you said that, Jerry, because that's exactly where I was going. Is how many coaches I talk to who say, "If I had only known X, I
Yeah.
would have done Y." And this is what I see on the NCAA level right now. Is this disconnect between the school sports psychology department and the coaching staff? Is, the psychology department is like, okay, there's all this going on in the life of this athlete, but the coach doesn't get to know any of it. Now, take that to a physical element, right? In the training room, if someone hurts their knee, the trainer goes, okay, so and so's got a bad knee. You're going to have to manage their training load. This is what we're working through to get them back to 100%. But right now we have, partial HIPAA, partial stigma. We don't know the mental piece, and this is a bridge. We have to bridge this gap, because I can't coach an athlete effectively if I don't know everything, and that athlete can't be coached by me as effectively. And so, Jerry, I love your question. Like, can I bring this? But Cassidy, like, what are your thoughts on that? How can any other like solutions for the coach to work with the mental performance department?
Yeah. And I think a good way to look at this and where it's going a little bit too is like, it's not just, oh, bring me in and I just work with the athletes and then don't work with the coaching staff, like, or in Jerry, your experience, like, it's like the coaches need coaching too, in the sense of like their mindset and the culture. And like any good leader and coach wants to be surrounded by people that are going to be, give guidance and sounding boards. And so if you're just like, oh, they're so separated, and it's like, hey, over here we have the mindset, sports psychology, mental health, mental performance, all this stuff, and it's like that's separate from the coaching staff. Like, no, like, like you
Mm-hmm.
got to be part of the whole unit. And I think environment really matters. And who are the biggest, impact on the environment? The coaches.
Mm-hmm.
They really create the environment for the team, which then impacts the individual athlete's mindset. And so, and I talk a lot about it in the book about dealing with challenging environments. And because there is a lot of coaches still stuck in some maybe old school beliefs and mentalities. And so again, when someone's working, if a coach wants to continue to improve their environment and wants to work with a sports psych, it's like, hey, ask for their feedback and coach, work on your own mindset, lead by example, better understand the principles and the strategies that the athletes are using. And then everyone's now more on the same page. So I don't know if that helps, highlight as well, but I think it's a really important discussion.
Yeah, no, I love it. So let's sort of start diving into the book. And one of the biggest things, and I know it's your most common question probably, and Jerry gets it and I get it all the time, especially in my work on the youth level, is this idea of, fear of failure, fear of making mistakes. And I think that's a big environmental thing right off the bat, that the coach creates an environment where, hey, we make mistakes here. That's how we grow. But what about just starting with the internal piece and this fear of making mistakes? Where does that come from? What causes it? And how do you start overcoming that?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the different topics on mindset, whether it's fear of failure or confidence or, the anxiety about what everyone thinks and all these kind of different components, they're all interrelated. And certainly there's the premises, there's a mindset of fear, right? And it's this mindset that focuses on like survival mechanisms and not wanting to screw up. And one of the good ways I like to approach it, and I break it down in the book a bit, is from Dr. John DeMartini's work around collapsing fantasies and nightmares. And a lot of athletes will hold on to this nightmare that it's so bad if I fail. And there's this inherently like dangerous thing that's like, oh, this would be so terrible. And therefore, if you have a nightmare and something you fear that you're therefore trying to avoid, which creates tension and all these other problems, well, what do you also have? That means you have a fantasy. There's no nightmare without a fantasy. And the fantasy that most athletes have and focus on is this, oh, well, if I win and I perform or I get to the next level, everything will be so great. It'll be awesome. And so one of the things we like to do is help people collapse the fantasies and nightmares. So it doesn't mean like, oh, I don't have goals and intentions. No, you still have the goal and intention. This is the external thing you're going for. And this is not the thing that you're going for, but you're going to get both. Nobody just wins all the time and succeeds and never makes mistakes. But we see them as more just different than like, oh, one's so good and one's so bad. When we judge things, it creates this polarity and emotional charge. And then we fear this thing. And as long as you're fearing that, it creates this mindset or this voice that's like, don't screw up. I don't know. and like, that's not going to help you perform well. And so we want to collapse that and then focus on a voice that owns your capabilities, trust yourself, goes on how to maximize your impact and thrive versus try to survive and don't screw up in this judgment mindset. So that's one of the ways to like think, where does this fear come from? It comes from these fantasies, nightmares. And a good also way to then premise this into one of the main concepts of the book is, well, why do we have this fear? Well, it's because our priority is the external results. As long as an athlete, a person is like their whole main thing, their whole why, the main thing that they're focused on and they care most about is the external results. It's like, oh, if I can just score today or get this outcome and the win, well, that's going to weigh on your mind and that's going to create the emotional charge. And what the premise of the book is, the through line is to flip it, meaning it doesn't mean to not care or care less about the external stuff. It means to care more about who do I want to be, because most people lose sight of that. They lose sight of like the mental state and how they want to show up and play and what is their process. And a lot of people make the mistake, well, let me focus on my mindset and my process so that I get results. What does that mean? You're still results first. You're focusing on results, not flipping it and being mindset first. And so I use also a good analogy of like be, do, have from John DeMartini's work as well, which is like there's the be, and then who do you be leads to the do, which leads to the results. But most people in the have, most people are results first. And they go, okay, well, now I'll focus on what I'm going to do to get the results. And the last thing I think about is like, well, now who do I want to be so that I can do these things and then forget this results? That's so backwards. Yeah. And it's a societal thing. It's not just a sport thing. It's like, start with who do you want to be? Why are you here in the first place? What's meaningful for you? How do you want to show up? And from there, the do flow, and it leads to better results. Yeah. And more importantly, you start enjoying the game more, which helps you play better and all these other compounding things. Yeah. But and again, goes back to that fear thing. So where's this fear coming from? Results first. You're going to get into a fear judgmental mindset. You get frustrated, deflated by failure. You get anxious and fearful, about big games and nervous. Your confidence gets tied to the external stuff. Everything then, trickles down from, if we make this shift, everything else can become a lot easier. Still other things to do and work to be done, but that's one of these fundamental things that if I can get someone to make that shift, everything else is going to flow a lot easier.
Kobe Bryant, and I know you referred to him in your book, but Kobe had this Mamba mentality, and I write about him in a few of my books, which is really fascinating. He was interviewed one time, and he was asked the question, how do you do this every day, every night, time and time again, when the game is on the line? You got to have some fear. He says, no, I don't have fear. And it almost sounded arrogant, It's like, wait a minute, you're Kobe Bryant. No wonder why you don't have fear. If I'm Kobe Bryant, I'm not going to have any fear. But the thing is, he says, I don't have fear because I'm being a certain way. And you just mentioned that. And I love that distinction about being. John and I talk about that all the time. We're human beings, not human doings. What are some of the things you find in your practice that could help people listening to us right now? When you say be, what does that mean? How do I be? Let's start with that. Let's be. And
I
how
love
can
that.
how can we be that?
Yeah, I love that. And I think the best way to kind of look at this and ties into the Kobe's work and his alter ego, the Black Mamba, is this, it's narrative, right? It's like, what is your narrative? And getting clarity, because most people aren't clear on who they want to be in different moments. And now who you be out on the ice or on the soccer field or in the boardroom or with your family at the kitchen table, it's going to be different. So it's an illusion to think that you're going to be the same person everywhere. Like, no, how we show up in different areas of our lives should be relatively different to serve that area. But then having clarity around it. And when I get an athlete, sometimes like, yeah, who do you want to be out there on the golf course? They're like, shit, I don't know. So like, and it's like, oh, well, we better get clarity around that. And so the narrative work and the identity work is so helpful, because we need to create who we're going to be versus, well, I'm just going to be me. Or I'm like, no, be specific. What traits, how do you want to show up? What do you value? What's meaningful for you? What does it feel like, particularly is what I often try to get to. Not just what are you going to do, but how do you feel while you do it? Like, I just had an athlete, a top player, and he was like, he's really clear on what he wants to do. I'm having a hard time doing it, but I know what I need to do. I'm like, well, are you clear on who you want to be and how you want to feel? Because if you can get that going, the do will start flowing a lot easier. And so, and a way to kind of like further unpack the being is, you think of like a narrative and identity. It's a feeling and a story is often the most impactful versus, well, I want to be confident and calm and in attack mode. Well, that's better than nothing. But like, now let's put a story and a narrative around it. And I'd like to use, I'll use Kobe's because it's so famous, who my mentor, Todd Herman, that I work a lot with, he helped Kobe create the Black Mamba, way back, and wrote the book, The Alter Ego Effect. And what's cool and what I like when you look at the Black Mamba, well, there's 3 traits for a mamba. And personally, I didn't know what a mamba was. It's a venomous snake from Africa. I just thought it was a cool name, but it's actually
Oh yeah.
It shows how clueless I can be at times. But there's 3 big traits that it has. And one is that it's super fast, one of the fastest snakes in the world. Well, Kobe want to be fast. 2, it can kill its prey from a long distance, right? Think 3-pointers in basketball, long range strikes. But then 3rd, it had such a venomous bite, it was considered the kiss of death. Like, talk about that killer instinct mentality that Kobe wanted on the court. He talked about unleashing that mentality and who he wanted to be. And so there was clarity in a story, and it stuck, and it was unique to him. And like, it's not complicated, and it's actually quite simple, but it's creative and it's personalized, and that's very powerful. And so when we're like, we want to get clear on who do we want to be and what's the story and the feeling that comes. You don't always have to be able to verbalize it, but you can feel it. Right. And that's when it's like, that's the being in the essence of that. And so it's a self-discovery, self-creation process that is highly valuable in all areas of our life. And especially in sport, where we lose touch of that so easily because of the weight and the allure of the results and the expectations, and our society generally breeding, oh well, what are we going to achieve, what's the goal, let's win, and all this external stuff. And we lose sight of the internal definition of success, or internal being, mental state. So
Yeah, I mean, I think this is so excuse me, so important. And I think James Clear in his book Atomic Habits did a really nice job with this, where he had like the 3 circles, and it's the same thing: my identity, my actions, my results. And he said, and so many people start with the results, right? I want to lose weight, so I'm going to do this, so I'm going to do these things, and then hopefully I lose weight, instead of I'm the type of person that eats healthy. Right. And so what would a healthy person do in this situation? I am the Mamba. What would the Mamba do in this situation? Well, he'd go to the weight room. He'd do it. And so when we start with that identity first, that guides our decisions. And like you said, I like this idea. I was just thinking about all these different aspects. So if I want to be the type of person who, is healthy and gets a good night's sleep, well, then what would I do? Right. And so then I make that decision. Well, of course, my phone's not in my room and it's shut off by this time. Of course, I read. Of course, maybe I take a shower and whatever. This is how I wind down or meditate or whatever it is. Like when my identity guides my behaviors rather than my behaviors hopefully shaping my identity, that's when the results come. And I think this is the basis of everything right here.
Yeah, 100%.
I think,
yeah.
Can I just add this, John? Because you're making a very vital point right here. Both of you are. In order to have an identity, don't you have to know why? Like for me, I have an identity, and there's a step before getting that identity, which is like, why am I doing this? And the reason why I'm doing this today with all of you, is because I know I'm real clear that my purpose and my meaning is to make a difference. I want to serve. I want to give. And I want to have fun, and I want to enjoy things. And yes, I do want to make a living, but those are down on the list. In order to have an identity, I think my why has to be clear. And I think when we talked about Kobe, why he was playing basketball was real clear. I mean, after a period of time, money was not the issue. I don't think it ever was, actually, but I think he was real clear on why he was playing the game. And I think that's real important. And, to get in touch with that why. And now we go from why, right? Why to identity, to now we can be who we are based on our why, and then the behavior. I'm just building this train of cars in each one. So there are things that have to get. We have to do them in the right order. If you don't get them in the right order, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And Cassidy, you alluded to that. You don't want to start doing things and without being a certain way, and you can't be a certain way if you don't have this identity, which comes from asking the question, why am I doing this ultimately? As a world national class athlete yourself, do you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. And in the book we use, I took a variation or took it from Todd's work too. He calls it the origin story. Like when would that identity born? When did you first fall in love with the sport? And then you first, the traits originated, where you're just out there playing, enjoying in the moment, competing, and getting connected to that. And what I really like when we unpacking, you could do like why, and you could do like the levels of questions to dig deeper. And what I also like to do is like, let's go back in time to one of the first times where you really like, oh, I felt I was in the moment and loved the game and experience. And then it's in that story where we can get the feeling of why we play or why we do something. So when did we first get this burning desire around the game or the things that motivate us? Like I'll take it out of sport and using my own, like my why and why I do the things that I do and to be the coach and write the book is to shift and have an impact similar to you around, people not just having this external results first, external definitions of success, and to create their own internal. because when I was 16, did not there. There's this huge void in my life, and I see it in others that they're just not certain on who they want to be, their own personal definition of success. So I'm being mindset first, on knowing what their why is, and they're just so lost touch of that because they're just so consumed with the external results. So like my why stems from that. When I was a kid and growing up, and was like didn't have that, so I'm like have this void. Like I want to help serve others and myself, and like when I was 16. So but so that story is more than just like, well, my why is this. It's like, no, that story creates this feeling. And so for an athlete, and a good example, and we've used in the book is like, and one of the athletes his name's Gucciardi, and let me share a story because it's a great story where he went back home. He was playing at Michigan State, goes back home after his first year, and plays on the outdoor rink, right? Playing in the backyard kind of thing. And he's just like, oh, I just felt so free and flowing. It's like, oh, like that's an origin story. Like when he was a kid, he played on the outdoor rink and just loved the game. So I was like, we renamed him. His nickname's Gooch. So his nickname, or his alter ego name, became ODR Gooch. I was like, when you're out there, like tap into ODR Gooch. That's your why. That's who do you want to be? What does it feel like? And there's a story that evoked the feeling he want. He was lights out that second half that season. I think he scored some sick highlight reel goal and then got drafted to the Washington Capitals, etc. But it was like the power of being connected to his why and identity and the B and his own internal definition of success, and could separate and filter the external stuff. Doesn't mean he didn't have it. Still, that stuff's still there, but he got really better connected. And a great example of like going down that path is necessary, and finding what elicit for you, and being connected to that.
Well, that's why you're so important, because I don't know any coaches that are willing to take an athlete in that direction. We go right to the do. I'm a coach.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what you got to do, right?
Yeah.
There's 4 steps before that. So I don't know many coaches. So here's where coaching education comes in. And for those coaches who are listening right now, I want to encourage you to do what we're talking about, because it's not that difficult to take an athlete in the off season and ask them these questions. And why are you doing this? And how do you need to be to do what you want to get? And then the athlete says, oh, instead of just doing it, I can be this. And yes, you can, because you can control it, right? You can control I'm controlling how I want to be right now. I want to be enthusiastic. Well, here I go. I'm enthusiastic. I know how to be this way, and we all know how to be a certain way, but we're not that way because we don't ask the question. So you and I and John, we go into these environments, sports teams, and the coach becomes dependent on us, when what we need to encourage coaches to do is to be who they are, to know why they're doing it, and then to pass that on to their athletes. And over time, even though that takes a little time, you'll save time at the other end when you're trying to slam something into their brains about how to move on the ice,
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, 100%. And I think it's, great for coaches to be learning and engaging. Again, goes back to why, like, don't just have sports psych and mental performance and psychology off to the side. It's like, no, you got to integrate that into the coaching staff, and you live and breathe it foremost. I say this, I don't think I have this in the book, but like example, like the growth mindset. Everyone gets, understands, I think for the most part, the importance of having a growth mindset. It is often a lot easier said than done to implement that for athletes. But one of the best ways to help an athlete, model that yourself. How many coaches are actually modeling a growth mindset? How many coaches are actually modeling, being centered and grounded and not having the fear of mistakes themselves? Because it's not easy, and we're all human. And so it's not that they need to become perfect at it, but are you intentionally working on it? Do you value this side of the game? Because if you don't, then like, how are you going to pass that on to the athletes? And then they complain, oh, my athletes aren't confident, they're not resilient. But then like, what are you doing as the leader yourself, and then being able to model that, let alone have those discussions and ask the whys and create the strategies and get them to get clarity on who they're being. And one thing I'll add, just because it's a very tangible kind of advice for coaches, is around the personal scorecard idea. Like I like this idea of like gamify the mental game, because it's so intangible. Like, hey, how did I show up on the field to play today? And well, how do you measure that? I don't know. It's like,
Hmm.
well, let's find a way. And so one of the things that I do and encourage in the books is, okay, create your own personal scorecard. As you get clarity in who you want to be and how you want to show up, well, then measure that subjectively. But it's like, and I use this 95 plus kind of rating system, meaning like, hey, I was 95 plus at owning my capabilities and trusting myself in attack mode in the offensive area when I had the ball or the puck today. And, or I was like, nah, I was at 80% on some touches, or 75 or 60. And then so you can just, oh, this is where I am. And now here's where I want to go. And now you can reflect on that daily versus like, oh, this is something I want to be, but then I don't really reflect on it. It's not very tangible and I don't really assess it. No, like if it's actually a priority, then let's track it, be intentional about it, rate it without trying to be perfect, because then that causes problems. I call it the perfect mental game trap. It's like, I had to have the perfect mental game. Oh my God, I got in my own head for a little bit. Yeah, you're human. Be 95 plus is what I set as a target. So avoids the trap of perfection. But just to your point around coaches and how they can implement this with their athletes, like create their own little scorecards.
Yeah, that's a great point. And John, just let me say this, and I know you're jumping the bit to get in here, but I want to go back just to that. Yeah, I want to go back to that. This is a lively conversation. I want to go back to the point of growth mindset. Every coach, you listeners out there, every coach that you admire, I'm going to say this, they all have a growth mindset. There's no question, whether it's the Steve Kerrs or the Pete Carrolls or the great coaches. Without a growth mindset, you don't go forward, and you're closed and you're shut down. And working with John is wonderful because John has a growth mindset. So it makes it better for me. I have a growth mindset. It makes it better for John. It makes it better for those who experience our work. And it's that whole attitude of, I've been at this work for, oh my God, 45 or more years. I keep saying that, but it keeps staying at that number as I get older. I know that I'm not even halfway there. And the good news is I'm not halfway there, which means I've got a lot more to learn, means a lot more books to write, which means a lot more help, and I can really fortify my why on making a difference. Why? Because I have so much room for personal growth. And I love when you mention being a model. And that's what a Steve Kerr does. A Steve Kerr goes into a locker room, he talks to an athlete. He doesn't talk about how much he knows. He talks about how much he needs to know. And in order to do that, he'll ask the athlete, what do I need to know to be a better coach for you? So it's that humble humility, vulnerable piece that we always talk about, John and I, and then couple that with this idea of a growth mindset. It all goes together. And when I looked at your book, in the PDF file, because we don't have a copy yet. I think that's December 1st, as you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, I was taken by the fact that you were onto that, and I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. I'll jump in. Sorry, John.
John, you can go to the bathroom if you
They don't
want.
want to hear from me. That's
John,
fine.
John, you can go to the bathroom.
For you, Cassidy, go
Go
ahead,
for a
man.
bike ride and come back.
Yeah. So, and I think a great example of the modeling that I think is so valuable, and again for the coaches listening, is around not just coaches, but and I'm sure we all do it ourselves, but even just like this notion within society, like the idea of the vulnerability piece, and how important I think it is, like when I work with someone one-on-one, to share from my own life, not even just my own athlete experience, but like, oh, this week I've been working on, I was getting frustrated, and it's like, it's just humanizing ourselves and humanizing that we can have our own thoughts versus like, well, I used to have challenges, but now my mindset's great all the time. It's like, what the, like, it's like, no, we're all human and we have doubts or fears or worries, and the charges come and we got to, get back to centered, and sharing that when it's appropriate in the right way, in the right fashion, I think helps open up and then allows other people to then have the dialogue. And so, and a lot of times I'll do this with, the higher level athletes where they're like, okay, I want to help so-and-so on my team, but it's like, I don't know, like, how do I even bridge that conversation? And I'm like, well, tell them about your struggles, like tell them about what your journey's been. And if they're willing to want to even talk about their journey and their challenges. And because if no, then you can't give unsolicited advice. So like, but but it allows you to normalize and open up and humanize the mindset, and that, yeah, we do get caught up in results, and we do get like the fear, and there's doubt in that voice and those things. And so it allows people to sometimes, find the solutions and self-reflect easier when it's not about them. It's actually so talking about ourselves, and which again creates, humanizes us, which is important, because it's not like, oh yeah, growth mindset and I never make a like I never have these thoughts. But then it also creates the athlete or the person's like, oh, I can see myself in that story and how I can relate it now to my own life. So I think those are really great ways to model as well, because that's what the Steve Kerrs and those, they do that. They model, they share from their own life, and that's so impactful.
You've used the word often here, and I want to just draw attention to it. The word feeling, right? How we feel, as Jerry always says, is how we function, right? And so, and then Jerry, you made a point. You said, you go meet with your coach, and the coach is all about, well, do this, do this, do this. Like, well, how do you feel when you're at your best? Right? Like, how are you feeling going back to your player playing on the outdoor rink, right? Like, outdoor rink, it's when I feel like this, I play my best. I'm free. I'm not worried about making mistakes. I'm smiling. I'm whatever. And and so I want to draw attention back to that. And then I think we never feel our best when we're overthinking things. Right. And so this is one of the big points of your book too, is how do we stop overthinking? How can I, as a coach in a way so that people aren't overthinking? And I think too many coaches overcomplicate. So how do we simplify? But then how can I, as an athlete, stop overthinking? Because no one feels great when you overthink things.
Oh yeah, it's a huge one. And I'll go with that in two ways. One, just to highlight the word feeling, and the importance of it, and having the full feeling and the alignment in your thoughts, feelings, and actions is kind of like just this fundamental piece. And I talk a lot about the book, the ideas of acceptance, commitment, and thinking of them more as feelings than just thoughts. Like, oh, I understand, I can think, we could go a whole thing on acceptance here. Maybe we'll come back to it. But it's like, oh, I can think I need to accept the range of results, but do you feel like you have? Or often it's like, oh, like an athlete that's injured, or an athlete that's not quite in the best position on the team and getting the playing time they want. They're like, I know I have to accept it. And they're like thinking that, but deep down the feeling is like, oh, like they're dragging their feet, like they haven't fully got that alignment. Right. And so, that's the difference. That's maturing, and that's having the perspective to be like, no, I fully, can accept it and get the feeling. And then that same thing with commitment. Everyone knows I got to be committed to my game and committed to the attack mode or whatever it is. And they commit to the results and the process, but like the mental state, commit to who do you want to be? Well, do you have that full feeling or not? And then leading this back into the overthinking piece, which is one of the simplest ways to beat the paradox of overthinking, because it's like I'm thinking too much. Well, what do I got to think about to stop thinking like a crazy? Like can't think your way out of overthinking. And so one of the ways is through feeling, but not just feeling in the moment, but actually thinking more before. And so a simple way, what's happening when you're overthinking and your mind's like ruminating and going a little squirrely, it's trying to plan and deal with the stresses and distractions and all this stuff because you haven't pre-planned about it in advance. So if we can think more before, we'll actually think less during, right? We plan to cope and deal with the stressors, distractions, and fears or whatever. Then when we get there, we know what we're doing. It's like studying for a test. Like you study before, so when you get there, you just do the test and you write the answers, and because you're prepared. And so a lot of times overthinking is just because of a lack of mental preparation about what are the different distractions. There's not enough clarity in who you want to be. And you haven't had the forethought, like how will I respond when the moments arise, versus I'm starting to overthink, and now let's worry about how I stop overthinking. Like it's not, it's a lot better to have the mental prep and create the routines and the identity prior. So yeah, it's I'll unpack that a bit further, but go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, gosh, my mind is just bursting.
You're overthinking.
I'm overthinking. No, but I've gotten so much to think about. And by the way, I made a comment about John, go for a bike ride. God, if you did, we wouldn't be able to do this. I can't do this without John. I just want you to know. He's my anchor for sure. Now I lost my trend of thought. But anyway, I'm back on it. Let's see. So this idea of being again, feeling, excuse me, feeling equals function, feeling. It's like we could all feel what we want to be. And so instead of, psychologists call this tool visualization, I've long ago forgotten about that tool. I call it feelingization. It's not a visual thing, is it? It's something we want to feel. So working with a basketball athlete at Duke University several years ago, this athlete was wearing number 23, and he was 6'6", and I said, so 23, let's see, who is that? Oh, Michael Jordan. Yes. How does he play? This is the way he plays. And he said, this is what I want to do. I want to do what he does. And I said, no, you don't. You want to feel the way it feels when you're being that way. And that was like a light bulb went on. And, you know, of course, it's a success story. I'm not going to say he went out and he blew it. He went out and he scored like 27 points that night and became a starter for the rest of the season. But the question that I find is really important for coaches to ask is to ask an athlete, and I'll ask this of myself, if you were to be the way you want to be, how does that feel as you're being it? Thousand people, I need to be a certain way. They paid money to see this, and I'm going to have to be this way. So I always still ask myself the question, Jerry, remember, if you want to be this way, the way you want to be, how does that feel as you're being it? And so 4 or 5 minutes before I walk out into the open, I already have that feeling. And as a human being, I can be. So I trust in that. And it's a matter of being mindful, isn't it? So that an athlete, before you went out on the ice, Cassidy, you had to have in your mind a way you wanted to be and feel that before you went on the ice. So it's not a visualizing thing, see yourself play and what that's like. It's like, if I'm going to be like Michael Jordan or I'm going to be like Cassidy, there's a certain feeling that I get if I were to play that way. So here I go. I'm going to play like that, and this is how it feels. Now that's the juice, because as John said, as you feel, you function. Feelings do equal function. If you feel depressed, you feel a lack of confidence. If you feel worthless and invalued, you're not going to have a good day. But if you're feeling confident and you're feeling really like you're well prepared and you feel happy and you're feeling uplifted, it's going to be a pretty good day for you. So I'm just saying that question, I had to come back to that question because that story, even though that story happened 23 years ago, by the way, same number, it's more than relevant for me when I experimented. I didn't know what the hell was going to happen. I did not know. But that night he went out and scored 27 points. And the thing is, I then saw that and then I started using it. So I think that question is an inroad into your soul, an examination. You put a flashlight down your throat and you can see your soul and you look around and see what you got there, but you got to ask the questions, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And that's why, like I say in the book, like visualization and, you know, your process, to me, the most important is the emotional state. Like, how do you want to feel while you're out on the ice or on the pitch or in those, on the big stage at a workshop or presentation? And it's, because how it might go, like an athlete on a 2-on-1 or a scoring chance, what they do can change, but the mental state you want to be in when you have the puck or the ball in the scoring area, that's generally going to be the same. And then what's helpful for an athlete to understand and conceptualize the feeling and who you're being, it will likely be slightly different than when you're breaking out or when you're attacking and checking. As to me, there's slightly different mental states that I call them different moments of impact. And so if you can start to have the nuanced clarity that, like, hey, when I'm here, this is how I show up. When I'm over here, similar, a lot of similar traits, but a little bit different. It feels a little bit different. right? A little more, hey, simple and make a play versus attack, creative, deceptive, killer instinct. And, versus, I'm open and being loud and demanding, calling the ball. And I really want, like, it's what traits are you activating in those different areas of the game? And, now you're getting a full, nice picture of, what does it mean to show up and play and who you want to be versus just a generic confident, right? But even just, again, doing that, and getting them to reflect and be intentional, because most people aren't doing it. It's so eye-opening. And then the ability to do it and do it day in, day out is very impactful. So when we do visualization, it's huge, which, it's the coping planning, it's the juice, like you said, get tapped into the feeling. So I love that example you shared.
So what are some tools, right? Some mental preparation tools or things to help people, how do you have a chapter or part of a chapter about training your concentration. But what are some of the things, and you also have a part on reset routines or mistake rituals and stuff, like just a couple little concrete tools that the coach listening could go out and, okay, I got a player who constantly makes a mistake and then they make the next and next. How do we hit the reset button?
Yeah, so I've highlighted what we just talked about, a bit about imagery, and that's, some mental prep and the visualization, intention, coping planning. We've already talked about a little bit that scorecard, which is more for after. And we talked a little bit about the alter ego, but the one you just brought up, which is the fourth of the main fundamental ones that we do with athletes, is that reset routine. And the way that I like to look at it is it's the way to activate the mental state you want. I encourage you to do it always before any practice and game. And then as well as obviously during, if there's like a long break or there's been a mistake, and you can flush it out and have those kind of different rituals. But the way that I like to simplify it, there's like 3 components to an effective reset. First is that acceptance, which I'll come back to and dissect a bit, because I think it's the most important step. The most athletes struggle to properly accept, and we don't quite understand what it is. And often people think acceptance is weakness, and it's not. It's a superpower. And then there's breathing, because usually taking some type of deep breath or, getting centered physiology, in your physical body. I struggle with the word physiology, but so the breathing is obviously really important, and breath. And then the C part of the reset routine is commitment. And that's being committed and clear on how you want to move forward. And so this can be, on the bench or between whistles, et cetera, or it can actually even be on the field of play. And it's something that happens really quick. It's a breath, and there's a routine wrapped around, okay, it's time to reset. But again, I usually encourage like a 5 to 15 second routine that they're doing at least at the before the practice and game, and the key moments during. And one of the ways to further break down that acceptance, because it is the most important part, is to first understand that, like, acceptance is not some weakness. It's like, oh, well, that means you don't care about results and whatever. And like, it's not a weakness. It's acceptance is just seeing things for what they are. It's being centered or stoic and having the perspective to embrace it. And a good analogy too is like, well, there's pink elephants and bubbles, which means if I say, don't think of a pink elephant, what do we think of? Pink elephants. And so the pink elephant is this noise that comes into our bubble. And sometimes we have a clear bubble, and our bubbles are focus awareness. But when the noise comes in, it clutters. And if we try to ignore it, hide from it, and just, focus and move forward, well, it still weighs there on our mind. So a way to learn to go to it is to the acceptance principle. You're going to get perspective and see it for what it is. And then once we do that, we can let it go. And that's the key. And then you can use the breathing and the commitment. Now, as we talked about, acceptance is a feeling. So this is a process. And the more you rehearse, you'll get better at it. So it's not going to be perfect because you created a reset routine, but it's a starting point. And the hard part is there's not like, oh, well, acceptance is like, stretch your arms and now you've accepted. Like, no, it's still going on inside, but associating something physical with it goes a long way. So whether that is to, brush their hand through the air, squirt water in the air and watch it fall,
ground your feet.
Ground your feet. But it's like, but that means accept, right? And that means accept. And you create an association for that part. And that will remind him, because a lot of athletes, like, it's like, oh yeah, by researching, oh yeah, what do I got to do first? Forget about it. It's like, no. Like, that's not the best way to understand dealing with our thoughts and our feelings, and to get that alignment that we want. We want perspective and to use acceptance principle. And then on the last part too, with the commitment, just to round it out again, is to also associate something there as well. Right. And if they have the time, they visualize from, okay, who am I going to be in that next shift, in the next moment? And how do I want to show up now? And they can even close their eyes, obviously not during the play, but close their eyes for a brief moment and be intentional. And then again, this is where you would activate the alter ego, or activate. And so it could be stomping the feet on the ground. It's like, oh, it's go time. Or they visualize activating that mental state that they want to be. So that routine works wonders. Like I've got people that can explain it. They can come up with a quick little routine. 5 years later, they're still like, yeah, I'm still using it. It's still helpful. So to me, it's too simple and easy and impactful to not play with and try. And then you still got to create it, know how to use acceptance, commitment, and all these other things. But it's such an effective tool if done and done well and consistently.
Jerry, any one final question for Cassidy as we're near the time? Because I know you have 6.
Oh my, John. Yeah. I just got to take a deep breath. I've got to accept the fact that I'm got limited time here, and take a breath and commit to what I'm going to be doing right now. I'm a learner. I'm learning so much here. I think the thing that comes up to me during this whole conversation is that in order to be a certain way, you've got to be able to control it. So the important key word for me is controllables. I can control being a certain way. I can't control what I can do, what I want to do. I might want to score 45 points. I can't control that. I might want to win. I might want to get drafted by the NHL. I can't control that. But what I can control is the little everyday little things. And what that does is when I'm focusing on what I can control, I feel relaxed, calm, intentional. But so many of us, athletes and presenters and podcasters, and if we're focusing in on how we look and how we're going to be, and am I going to ask the right questions, and is Cassidy going to like me? I can't control these things, but I can control my eye contact, my enthusiasm. I can control all these things. So I think in summation for me, I'm learning a lot of details which come under the umbrella of control what you can. It's like the serenity prayer, control what you can, accept what you can, and have the wisdom to know the difference, because so many of us don't get that until it's too late. And then, I wish I had done that. I wish this was the so, what can I control? I can control my work ethic. I can never give up. The thing about me, I was never the talented one on the court, but I would never give up, no matter what. I don't care what it was, and do all the little things. And when those things are taken care of, then that all fits into mitigating the fear, making the fear a lot less, and making you more successful, and shifting your focus, and becoming Kobe Bryant.
Exactly. He's an inspiring story and alter ego. And one way I love we tied into controllables, which is such a good foundational way of looking at mindset and the mental game. And think first, like there's the controllables of what you do, and then the controllables of who you're being and how you show up. And most people are overlooking the latter, and they're trying just to focus on this. Like I was alluding to that athlete that's like, oh, I know what I need to do, but like I'm having a hard time doing it because he hasn't focused on this controllables. And so it focus on both. Both matter. It's not like, oh, it's only mindset, and what you do doesn't matter. Like they're interconnected and overlapped. But having that clarity, and just like this is within your control. Now, one thing I like to add to it is like, is it easy or is it hard? It's neither. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, it's super easy to just focus on being the mental state you want, and those controllables will be 95 plus, and like it's super easy. But I also don't want to sit here and be like, oh, it's super hard, it's not attainable. Well, now that's just setting you up for like, oh, well, I can't do it, it's so hard. And so it's going to take what it's going to take. To quote Trevor Moawad, like it takes what it takes. And but it's not inherently hard nor inherently easy. It's just a process, and just be committed to that process and focus on, hey, I can control this. But it takes energy, just like anything else that you want to work at that's within your control. You want to improve at it. It's a process that takes intentional effort and focus. And so, yeah, I love that way that you pulled it together, Jerry.
Cass, the book is Mindset First, Break Free of the Weight of Results, Play with Confidence, and Perform when it matters most. Where can people get this book? And then I want to give you the final word as well. Also, let people know how they can connect with you directly. Give them your website and social and all that.
So the book will be available on Amazon. There's also an Audible version. So those will be the two main ways to get it. I recorded the Audible version. That was a process. Talk about some personal frustration.
That's a whole other podcast right there.
Right.
So that was the thing. So that should all be available, and Amazon's the best place. That's where we're going to distribute it. And you can find out more about me. I got a new personal website launching right now. www.drcassidypreston.com. So that's my main personal website now, and there'll be information on the book, and there's ways to get a book PDF, etc., and the first chapter, and get the book worksheets, etc., that go with it, so that you can follow along and do the exercises that are in the book. So I encourage people to go to my website to download that and get access to it from there.
Love it. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, this was such a great talk. So much important territory that we covered, and we just scratched the surface. It's a really good book, man. Congratulations on it. And thanks for coming back on The Way of Champions.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really a pleasure to dive in. Appreciate you having me on.
Jerry, that was pretty fun conversation there with Cassidy, huh? There's a guy who understands high-level athletic performance and then really turned it into a wonderful career in mental performance coaching and sports psychology and all this. But yeah, it's a good book. It's a really good toolkit, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought so. And I really appreciated a lot of what he had to say. It's not, to be honest, it's not like terribly earth-shattering, groundbreaking new, but what he does is he takes a lot of what you and I teach, and he simplifies it, and he used that word simplify, and he's got a nice system where he outlines steps that you can take, and I think a lot of us want that and need it, and I think this book is going to really fulfill the needs of a lot of coaches out there. I particularly like the fact that I don't know, he's a young man. He's talking about growth mindset. Not many young people are thinking along those lines, and he definitely is touching upon something, not only telling us about himself with a growth mindset, but how important it is for all of us as coaches, regardless. I don't care how old I get, I'm still going to have a ton to learn, and that keeps me going and keeps me interesting, and it keeps me interested.
Yep. I hear you. And I love, just again, the idea of mindset first. I always go back to when you and I had that chat with Alan Goldberg, and he said, once competition starts, it's 100% mental. Right. And we need to be training this and having the tools, just like we build strength so our bodies are resilient. We need to build mental strength so our minds are resilient, because there will be mistakes, and there will be bad calls, and there will be opponents do something spectacular. And in that moment of pressure, right, when it matters most, that's when you have to be able to shift and perform. And that's mental.
Well, I think what it really comes down to, and I just thought of this in this moment, and that is we have to. It's about a relationship with failure, and I finally, after all these years, I have a really good relationship with failure. If I had to choose between failure, success, whatever, it's not a big deal for me, because failure is success. I have gotten to where I am because I've been blessed with great failures that I've been able to have the opportunity to correct and get better. When you make a mistake, what an opportunity to get better. And so it's reprogramming your mind. And he referred to that, and he talks about it in the book, how to do do that. But I just think really our relationships with these things like anxiety. Anxiety is nature's way of telling us, what's not right here, because those same butterflies are excitement.
Mm-hmm.
But when you interpret it a different way, those same butterflies are anxiety. And we perform differently between excitement and anxiety. So what it really comes down to is encouraging our listeners, maybe we could all develop, which I've been in the process of doing for a long time, a different relationship with fear, a different relationship with failure, a different relationship with all those obstacles that stand in the way. And, as that famous book, Obstacle is the Way, we embrace the obstacle. And it's something I wouldn't be here if my book weren't my third book wasn't declined for publication 15 times. It
Mm-hmm.
really turned me around, and that's who we are. It's
Mm-hmm.
our mistakes,
Mm-hmm. Love it. Well, it's a great conversation. Again, you can connect. drcassidypreston.com is his website, and it's a great way to learn more about the book, download some PDFs and worksheets for the book and all of that. And just as we're signing off, want to thank all of our Patreon podcast champions for supporting our work. You all are the best. Thank our friends at Sprocket Sports for sponsoring the podcast. And thank all of you for listening and sharing and commenting. And we love when we get your emails and saying, wow, I really enjoyed that or whatever. So always reach out and let us know what's happening in your world. If you have an interesting guest, things like that, because we're always looking for more fascinating people to talk to. So thanks for all your work, coaches, parents, athletes. Your influence is never neutral. Go out there, make a difference, make a positive influence. We'll see you again next week.